Hello and welcome to the Human Innovation Podcast, the podcast for innovative leaders. I'm your host, Jens Heitland, and today my guest is Linda Perry. Linda is a success strategist who combines mindset tools with strategic implementation to help small business owners crack the code to greater success. Linda is also a recovering attorney and copywriter and uses her skills of persuasion to show business owners how to scale and make the impact they desire. In this episode, we explore her story and how she went from law school to be a success strategist and coach. We talk about common challenges innovative leaders and entrepreneurs faced and how they overcome them. Please welcome to the show, Linda Perry. Linda, welcome to the show. Great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, Jens. It's great. It's great to be here.
I'm looking forward to discover the mindset topic with you today. But before we go into that, from an attorney that managed federal criminal cases around the whole US to being a success strategist for business owners, how the hell did you do that jump? Before we go into that, you need to first explain one picture. I've seen in the internet a picture of you poking into a brain with a couple of tools.
You want me to explain that first? Okay, so that
Yes.
came out of a conversation with the brilliant Sarah Ashman, who was my branding strategist, who I had actually hired to talk about my own brand. And one of the things that she said would be fun to play with was really putting some tools in my mouth and excavating a brain. And what I really do and what I do well is help people understand how their personal brain works. So not only can they find their strengths, but they can really move through their blocks and understand how they're making decisions, how they can actually improve upon their decisions. How do they stop getting stuck on that plateau that I call it? So Sarah Ashman is the brains behind the picture with the brain.
Yeah, so everyone go to LinkedIn, check out Linda M. Perry, search for Linda M. Perry. Yeah. Linda Perry is someone else. It took me a while to figure that out, but yeah. So it's in her LinkedIn background. Very cool photos. I really love it. But tell us more about, that's not really fitting to an attorney, at least not what I was thinking about an attorney.
Well,
so how did you start your career and how did you end up being a success strategist for business owners?
I should send you some of the photos I have from when I had my first website as an attorney in the suit. Totally different. Here's the thing. I loved being a criminal lawyer. It was really interesting work. My work changed every day. But it also, after 17 years of visiting prisons, of fighting a system, it got tiring. And I actually had never really wanted to do criminal law. I was somebody who was more fascinated with how the brain is really working. How do we make decisions? How do we get stuck? And so much of my life, I ended up stuck in places because I was afraid of something, or I had limiting beliefs about who I was or how far I could go. And in fact, I used to joke that I wasn't motivated by money, but what happened was that was just a limiting belief, and my partners could pay me less. And so I started to notice how my own thoughts had limited me. I stayed with a law firm for 14 years because I was afraid if I left, people would discover I was a fraud, that I wasn't really this quote unquote rock star that I pretended or put a face on to be. I mean, I did great. I was successful. However, inside I wasn't. So I kept thinking maybe it's my law firm, maybe it's something else. And so I even tried to become a mediator. I became a collaborative divorce attorney. I went out on my own. I did all these things to see, is it the law? Is it me? What is it? And I discovered the work of Debbie Ford probably years earlier. And she wrote 9 best-selling books. She was a student of Deepak Chopra. She followed Carl Jung's methods. And what I learned was by following some of Debbie's work, my life started to change. I started to have more confidence. I felt less angry, less resentful. My relationships started to change. And so it was through Debbie's work that I started to see my own life take some baby steps forward. And so I looked at my husband. We had recently gotten married, and I said, I'm not sure I really want to do this lawyering thing anymore. And he said, okay. And Debbie trained coaches at the time. She passed away shortly after I was trained, but she trained coaches. And so I spent a year studying in her program and then another 9 months getting another certification from her program. And I decided to become a coach. And I just took the leap and I left the law. And the funny thing is that I thought I had to leave the lawyer in me behind. But turns out when I became a coach, it took me a long time to adjust because it was a much softer job, if you will. And so over the years, I have learned about business strategy. Over the years, I learned most coaches fail. So I learned everything I could about business strategy and started to teach it to others. And so I ended up really bringing the best out of every single aspect, the best out of marketing and business growth, the best out of the legal field in the sense that I'm really direct. Like I don't tell people to go hang out with crystals as much as I love them, but I'm pretty practical. And then I combined the mindset tools to really help people come up with the answers they need for their life, their business, their goals. How do you really reach that higher ground? And so the journey was long. I mean, I've been a coach for now probably 10 plus years. And so all of this journey really has led me over the last few years to this place where I use all of the tools of everything that I've experienced to really help business owners, corporate executives, really lawyers find their path to growth in a way that feels sustainable, that they feel like they can get out of their own way and really achieve what they are looking for.
In your story, was there a specific moment which helped you to cross the line?
I think there are moments that I collected. I often tell the story that I think it began on my third date with my husband when he looked at me and told me I hadn't failed enough. I almost walked out on him, but he was right. I didn't know what it meant to fail. I only knew what it meant to show that perfect front. I knew what it meant to work really hard and for hours on end. But I think what really gave me this courage was recognizing how much of my life had been built up on a path created not by me, but by my parents. They were immigrants from the former Yugoslavia. They were doctors. They were very, very clear that I was going to be a doctor or a lawyer. And I fainted at the sight of blood, so lawyer it was. And I never really explored what was it that I wanted or what was I good at. And so I think it was through coaching that I learned how to give myself permission to try something, to fail, to go after something bigger that felt more fulfilling. And so I think it was really just a moment that I promised my husband I was done. He's like, okay, you're either done or you're going to continue to pursue law. And I promised him I was done. And so I went forward.
When I have had my first coaching experiences being coached, but on the other side as well, learning to coach as a leader in an organization, it's quite often the case that people live the life of others. And often it is, like you said, in your case, it's the life of the parents. And funnily enough, it's often coming out only when people have been quite successful already in their career, at least what the people I have to do with. I don't know how that is for you. But it takes a while to get to that point to say, now I'm stepping over the line and I'm saying to myself, no, enough is enough. I want to do something else. And then you do it. And some people do it with 50 plus, some people do it with 35 plus, but more 35 plus than below 30, at least in my experience. How was that for you? And how do you see that as well with the people you work with?
I see the exact same thing, that I think we have our heads down checking all the boxes that are supposed to bring us happiness, that are supposed to bring satisfaction, that are supposed to bring fulfillment. Yet we reach a point where we've checked all the boxes. I went to graduate school. I got my law degree. I graduated with honors. I got a great job. I had this fun career. I mean, the stories were fun, right? I had 2 children. I was married to my first husband. And all of those things, and I had this beautiful house living in downtown Chicago. And I thought all of those things are supposed to make me feel happy. And they didn't. And I think many people get to that point and they ask the question, is this it? And they start to wonder, whose life did I build anyway? And I think there's never, especially when I was raised, there wasn't this curiosity about who do you want to be. I've definitely raised 2 very different children who are carving their own path, even as my daughter chooses to go to law school, right? But the idea is that I really think that so many of us are taught, do this, 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 and that's the formula. Yet we wake up one day and say, but I did it all. And none of it is really what I wanted. And so I think there is an opportunity. And I often think there's 2 different camps of people too. There is that age that we hit 35 and above. I happen to have been 35 and blew up my life at 35. And so, but I think there are those people who find purpose in their work, and there are people whose work builds their purpose. I think for those who recognize that their work is really a means to reach whatever their purpose is, find more satisfaction and stay in their jobs. My husband is very much like that. I, on the other hand, was raised with a mother particularly whose work was her purpose. And so I was taught that that's what work was. And if it wasn't fulfilling why I was here, then I think I had to move on. And I recognize that in a lot of people I work with, is that for them, work is their purpose.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I can speak for myself, at least. It's the same. And when I did the jump in 2019, changing my life dramatically, not with a blessing from everyone, but
right?
Like you say, it was finding out what is my purpose. And there must be something out there which is bigger than what I've done until then, though that I was quite successful, same like you are, or
Yeah.
you have been.
Yeah.
What I still want to figure out, because I have a 5-year-old daughter, how do I help her in being successful? I have no idea yet. I still have a couple of years to figure that out.
You do. I think somebody who has children currently in their young 20s, the one thing I have learned is reminding them that they have so much of a runway that they can change.
Yeah.
These were not things that I was ever taught. My son wanted to start out as a biochemistry major and was miserable. And I asked him, are you going to be a doctor? And he said, no. Are you going to be a lab? No. By the time I left him at school that weekend, he was a philosophy major by the end of the weekend. And he still, has that, what am I going to do with that? I'm like, you'll figure it out. But it is just having a different mindset when you raise children. It's interesting.
Yeah, I still remember when I was, I think, around 14 or 15, my dad said, just the first job you do, because we have a slightly different education system in Germany, the first thing you do need to be something what you can always go back to, even if things are not working out in the future. And which is quite funny, because I learned electrician, like electrical engineering.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to go back ever, but I could go back and work on construction sites, like really worst case scenarios. So there's always a way back,
Well, that's a
which
little bit
it
of
was quite smart.
right. It is quite smart. It's what my mother said. You can get a law degree and you will always have work, right? You can always hang
Yeah,
up a shingle, as she would used to say. And I think with European parents, they were very practical and pragmatic in that way.
yeah. Let's go into mindset.
Sure.
Before we look into how do you work with people on the mindset, what did you experience for yourself, your mindset shift over the last couple of years where you have worked already as a coach and working with business people?
So my own mindset, you know, like so many people that I work with, I face the same challenges of self-doubt, of negative criticism, of pushing myself, of worrying about others seeing me as a fraud. I have the same things that every one of us has these things. And I think we believe we're supposed to be positive, right? Luckily, I had Eastern European parents, so that they weren't always positive, which is good. But the idea is that, like, especially in the United States, there's a discomfort with the negative or if someone's not feeling good. And so one of the things that I learned first was to accept the feelings that exist and not try to push them away, not try to make it happy, not try to be like, oh, everything is fine, right? But my biggest issue for me was always this belief that I was stupid, no matter what I did, right? I was, all of our beliefs really start when we were before the age of 10, before we're old enough to really comprehend what is happening around us. So I early on developed this belief that I was stupid. My sister, who was 4.5 years older than I was smart. She was labeled smart. I was labeled the cute one. Really terrible things to do to a kid, right?
Yeah.
And so I carried this belief. So I always thought I had to work harder than everybody else. I always thought, that I had to hide anytime I was stupid. There were so many things that stopped my own business growth early on because I was too afraid to try something new. I would study extra hours before I would do anything. I mean, it even goes to this day, it'll be little things like I had to pick up a package at a post office here in Portugal, and I made sure I looked up exactly how do you say that, because I didn't want to look stupid or be that obnoxious of American who doesn't try, right? Whatever it is in my own head. But these are how our beliefs tend to run the show. And like so many people, I had to really understand, where did these beliefs come from? That they weren't even my own. That most of the beliefs that we hold really are a result of something that happened when we were young or we're told something. And so we have an opportunity not to make them nice, but to understand where they came from and shift them into empowering beliefs. We get to choose and decide which beliefs we lean into. Now, it's not as automatic as saying like, oh, I'm just going to believe I'm smart today, because the way it works is, 10% of our decisions are made by our conscious brain. 90% are made by our subconscious brain. So it's the subconscious brain that's telling you all these nasty things that you hear. So it wouldn't work in my subconscious programming to say, oh, I'm just now smart. So I had to start small with little things like, as long as I give myself time, I can do anything. And that started to serve me well. So I could try new things. You asked, how did I leave the law? Well, as long as I give myself time, I can do anything, right? Start a new business, great, right? Learn how to be a copywriter, great. All of those things came with shifts. It also learned to stop believing in my fears. And I think that's the biggest thing that all of us struggle with. We believe our fears as if they are true, right? I'm going to run out of money, or I'm going to fail, or all of a sudden my pipeline of clients isn't coming in as it was. I've done something wrong. I'm a loser. I'm an idiot. We do these things to ourselves, and then fear makes you work harder. Fear makes you take clients that you don't want to take. Fear makes you cut salaries of your team members. It makes you cut team members themselves. It does all of these things that I say put you right on the plateau and keep you stuck, as opposed to intentionally growing as a person or your business. So for me, it has been always shifting my relationship with fear, questioning my beliefs, allowing myself to not necessarily stay in the positive, but really lean into trust. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I can control how I'm showing up today, who I'm surrounding myself with, how I'm marketing myself, how I'm communicating with others. Those are the kinds of things that we want to start to shift into. I think the mistake with mindset is people think that it's all about being happy all the time. What it really is about response and stimuli. It's the power that is in between that stimuli and response. Something happens, how do you respond? Most of us go directly to our emotions or to our fears. The trick with mindset is to create a pause so that you're not going down a bad path for weeks. You're going down a bad path for maybe a day, 2 days. But that's really mindset. And I think people make the mistake of what it really is. It's not about, I'm never going to stop you from being afraid. I promise I can't. We're hardwired that way. We haven't evolved. We're looking for the
Yeah.
saber-toothed tiger, and it's just a cyber-toothed tiger. It's true.
What I like about that is the aspect of time. In the busy world where we work in, like you said to yourself, and I can speak for myself as well, we are working very hard. We are working a lot. We are in a time where we are not allowing us to step back and spend time with ourselves, going deeper, spending the time consciously thinking about the discovery of our like fear. That's not, at least in the culture where I grew up, that's not the discussion point. Like zero. With my buddies, with my best friends, we would never talk about this. That's not part of the game. And in
Right.
business, even less.
Yeah, but you know what I'm noticing is that in business there are more and more of these discussions, and I'm grateful for them. But especially for entrepreneurs, it's starting now in more corporate cultures. Why are things not working? And I think we understand that it's not about you have to have somebody work more hours. You know, your team isn't getting along because, Jane is not a nice person. That your team doesn't understand how to communicate with one another. They don't understand their motivations. And I think they are starting to have these conversations more and more. But one thing I would caution is that I think they almost don't go deep enough. Right? We talk about, how do we improve communication? And we jump automatically to the doing. And I think we need to go back a step and who are we being? And really understand it begins with be, do, have. And so I'm hoping, you and I are probably both hoping that people have more of these conversations so they can move forward.
For me, there's no way out. We as society need to go into that direction. If we just look into talking a little bit of innovation, the technology development with all the AI things that's going on right now. For me, the biggest differentiator in the future is that we are humans, that we are truly evolving as humans, going back to who we are and finding out what the human interactions make us different and how do we bring that part into an organization rather than how can I type 5 seconds faster than another person, which maybe was good in the 80s, but
Right.
that's done. We need to be even more human than ever before.
I think you're right. And I think it's interesting because I watch a lot of the mindset around AI, since you're bringing up AI and we're talking about innovation. And AI can be a beautiful thing. ChatGPT has given me lovely itineraries for my new city that I live in. It's given me wonderful restaurant recommendations and great email subject lines when I'm tired.
Yeah.
But it is missing that human piece. And I think what's fascinating is to watch human reaction to AI too, because there is a bit of a panic, or there's, particularly in marketing industries where I live and breathe and coach a lot, I watch the copywriters, the marketers talk about it and defend themselves almost against AI. And rather than it being a defensive stance, I would love what you're saying is we're needing that human touch, because no matter what happens, it is who we are at our core when we are vulnerable, which is not a popular business word, but vulnerable not for the purpose of throwing up all over people and sharing our yuck, not that, but vulnerable for what we're really trying to accomplish, establishing a mission, building teams, creating relationships that humans are going to be, we still need humans. We still need human innovation. That's really what's going to make a business thrive versus another one that has the same type of service. And I
Yeah.
think that's important to remember.
100%. So when you work with business owners, how do you get them starting to work on themselves with the mindset? Maybe they did already the first step when they reach out to you, but how do you get them into that?
There's a couple of tools that we start out with initially. First, every single client, before I start with them, I get to know them. What's their challenges? What are their blocks? What are they really looking for? I want to know what's going to be, what do you want different? Because usually when someone's come to me, they recognize that they're the problem. To quote Taylor Swift, it's me, I'm the problem, right? They recognize they're the ones getting in the way. And so my job, though, is really to understand what is it that you want, because sometimes they don't even know that. But recently, I have a whole set of tools, and what I always start with, recently I became certified by the Y Institute in the Y operating system. And what it does is it really taps into that limbic part of our brain that many people can explain how and what they do, but this taps into their why, their true motivation. So, and there's 9 different types of whys, and mine is better way. Of course, it's better way. I always think there's a better way to fix things, do things. It's, there's a better way to live, right? It's why I live in Portugal. And so what it does is it opens the door for some awareness. And so what has to happen is this is who you are. And then we work really on, what does your vision look like? We talked at the beginning of this program of like how I was living someone else's life. So of course I'm going to tap in and find out, whose life are you living anyway? Whose program has been, embedded into your brain that you were following? And is it yours? If it's yours, great. Let's then look at what that is, because we have to anchor ourselves in a clear vision. Otherwise, our vision is being painted by others, by fear, by our limiting beliefs, by our doubts. And so we want to start to anchor ourselves into something. And so what I do at first I help people understand their why operating system. How do you work? Like if you're somebody, for example, who believes there's a right way, you're going to show up in the world differently than I am with better way. And so we want to align you with the kinds of things that make sense for you. Now, I also have tools around the Enneagram and strength finders and a bunch of assessment tools that help me really understand the person, so that I know exactly, it doesn't matter whether they're looking to reach a goal, become stronger leaders. At least I understand who they are as a person, and it gives them a bit of a window. Then we really do carve out time to understand your vision, because most people think visions are goals. Like, I'm going to make $250,000 this year. I'm going to, take Fridays off. No, a vision is way bigger than that. It's something that lights you up. It is not that list of, what am I going to do this year? And I really root people in that because we're not taught to think of impossibility. And so I really start there so that we can maybe crack open a window, as you might think, of the brain and say, how might life actually look at the end of this road?
On the vision piece, do you work with them on the business vision or more on a personal level first?
Yeah, yes. And I answer that yes because it's both. It
Yeah.
really does require both. I believe, for me, particularly, I can't have a business vision without my life vision, right? And so I do work with people on both. And inevitably, what I teach clients is it's the microcosm of the macrocosm. In other words, one vision feeds another, and how you show up in one is how you show up in another. And so we do work with both.
Yeah. It's fascinating because I have found that out without knowing that you do that for myself over the last years. Um, because I was always connected to these human topics, but I was not really working in fields connected to that. Oh, I was an engineer.
Right.
There are humans involved, but the rest of the stuff is not that human.
Right,
So,
exactly.
but my father has worked in that field all his career, and I've never really paid attention to that. And he died in, what was it? Inside of COVID. Um,
Sorry.
and then I was questioning myself in that things as well. Where do I have this drive? Because I always focused already on leadership and how people are leading me. So it was more towards me. It's like, hey, if you're an asshole, I don't want to work with you. That part. But it came quite a lot from my dad and from the way he raised us as kids as well. But it was not conscious, like you said as well. And now over the last years, I said this is exactly the thing I want to do because it's a topic I have a passion throughout the last 30 years at least, and it was kind of visible but not visible, at least not consciously for me, and now I'm combining all of these things into my own business in the same way.
What's really cool about that is that I think you really point out something important about vision is that it's always inside of us. It's just that we may not be ready to see it. We may not be ready to be awake for it. And I do find it interesting that it did unlock a little bit as your father passed away. I mean, it's interesting, and we could probably have a whole other conversation around this, but when you lose your parents, there is this permission that almost opens up for you to begin to explore these pieces of yourself. And I think, I know that was the case for me when I lost my mother and my father as well, but it is really an opportunity. And these are the moments that we can reflect or look back. And I think it's amazing, though, that your vision was right there. It's just, it needed its time for when you were ready to see it.
Yeah. And then formulating what was not that clear. It took a while as well.
I think that's
It was,
normal.
yeah, it's a process. And I think that's going back to you coaching people. It's very, very helpful, or for me, it was very helpful to have another person that guides me through questions. Even if you're an educated coach like I am, you are asking sometimes difficult questions, but it's easy to ask other people the questions.
Yeah.
You can use the same tools, but it's often not that effective, at least in my experience, to do all the tools for yourself. Then yes, it's better than not doing it, but it helps when you have an external person that is asking you questions and seeing things from a different angle.
Yeah, it's interesting. My clients often say, "You ask a lot of questions," or I often will hear, "That's an interesting question," or "That's a good question." Every call.
Yeah.
Um, and I do think, especially early on, I had a coach, and I did have a lot of people guide me. And when I'm stuck, I definitely reach out to people. But I have I've been doing this work now for a decade, so I now have anchored myself into a bunch of tools. I can't lie to myself anymore. I can see and bust myself very quickly.
Mm.
If I see money mindset coming up, I can bust myself quickly and start to use my toolbox, right? And I think it wasn't as automatic once upon a time, but it is now. And I think that's what I try to get my clients to is there are points, right? I'm always here. Come back. It's like a tune-up. However, this is meant to be a toolbox that you can use and go back to over and over so that every time we reach, again, I use that word plateau because I think it's the most descriptive piece. It's like we reach that flat ground. We want to run from it, but the toolbox helps you sit and learn the lessons so that you can keep going. And I think that's so ultra important for all of us.
Yeah. That's also what I love about working with a coach. You learn these toolboxes or you gather these toolboxes over time and then you can use it. So it's like you understand how the framework works and then it's maybe not as effective, but it still works for yourself. So you, like you said, for yourself doing it and then repeating it.
Yeah.
What are common things you see if we go towards entrepreneurs and maybe looking a little bit more at startup founders, like people who are, or can as well, other entrepreneurs that are just getting started and don't necessarily need to be a startup with a lot of uncertainty, but there's always uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
So people who are starting a business, what do you see they struggle most with when it comes to mindset?
There's a few different categories. Certainly, expertise, right? The imposter complex is one of the first things that I'll see.
Hmm.
Who am I to be doing this? Who am I? They start to comparisonitis, as I call it, which then leads to that imposter and the self-doubt. I see that a lot early on. And so there's this tendency to discredit whatever, look, we all come up with these great ideas. Startups come up with great ideas. This is going to be amazing. This is great. Everybody wants it. And when it becomes harder to build than we imagined, then we start to look around, we compare, we have imposter complex, which then also, as if there is a struggle, I see money mindset huge, right? Money
Yeah.
mindset is the willingness to settle for less than our vision. I think we will take clients that we shouldn't. We don't invest dollars in things. There's scarcity. So what happens is you work harder and harder and take on more and more, and you burn out because you're so afraid that the money is not going to be there. And then the systems aren't set up in place, right? So it's this almost feeding of those two that I see quite early on. Definitely the imposter, definitely money mindset, definitely self-doubt. And we all come with a healthy dose of fear. So fear can be really great, right? Fear is what keeps you going sometimes or innovating. I've created some really neat things out of fear. However, if it becomes the reason that you fall into bad patterns and are sabotaging your business early on, then fear needs to be examined. But I definitely think those are some of the most common things right away for startup companies, for startup, and I will tell you, hiring poorly instead of thinking about, for example, one of the reasons I like creating awareness in the business owner, who am I? What are my skills? So, for example, I am a quick start. I can come from idea to concept to execution so fast, but that's not always a good idea. And so I like to hire people who are a little more thorough, more detailed, who slow me down because I can be super fast and that's not always good. That's great at the beginning of a business, but it's the fastest way to screw up a business too. So hiring poorly because so-and-so had a friend who's willing to work and blah. No, it's really not understanding how important that first hire is. And by the way, it's not always an assistant. People always are like, go get your virtual assistant. I'm like, that's not always the best hire. But really thinking about some of these things, these are the big pieces of head trash, as I call it, at the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen them in myself as well.
I bet we all have.
No, it's quite funny. If you do a step out of a corporate world like you did from a very successful job, which I've had as well, and then you start all over again, you are used to a different world where you're successful because you have done that game quite a bit, most of the time at least. And then
Mhm.
you start into something you have a lot of knowledge around, but only about specific things. I have never run a business myself. If we just take myself, so I know how to build innovation ecosystems and how this works in a large organization where you have a couple of thousand people who are not properly working together. So I know how to orchestrate that part. But then how do you put that into a website and tell someone that they should buy that? That was not existing. So
Right.
for me, it was like, holy cow, I have zero idea about this. So I'm starting all over again. I was reading all the books and watching all the YouTube videos to figure that out. And then it's like, no, I'm not good enough. And then, like you said, moving towards the money thing. Oh, I need to get a client.
Yeah.
I need to get my first client. Whoever is saying yes, and I do half the price.
Right. And that's a huge problem.
Yeah,
And you end up resenting that client too because you're just like, they're not the right client. And it's not the client's fault. You stepped over your own boundaries.
agree. And that's the biggest mistakes I did in the beginning. Wrong clients.
I'm curious too, because you did come from corporate, and I often see this too. Did you find yourself, trying to still fit the mold of how you worked? Like, I find this, we were talking about this before we hit record. There's the employee mindset of the entrepreneur that never leaves. It's like, I'm going to work from 9 to 5. I need to have all of these things in place, and they don't really embrace the fact that no, you're now the CEO. I mean, yes, you're the CEO and the employee and the accountant and the marketing director and everything, but they never really quite embrace the CEO. They don't know how to delegate, they hold on to everything. So I'm curious if you experience some of that too.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Was difficult, and then for me it went into the other direction where I was working 24/7
Mm.
to overcompensate.
It's hard, isn't it? Yep.
But I think it's also it's part of the journey, because then if you're not staying there, I'm still working way more, to be honest, compared to me in the corporate world. But it doesn't feel like work.
Right.
So if you consider, for example, the podcast could be part of my business, which I use for business and at least for personal marketing reasons and so on. So it's kind of work, but it doesn't feel like work. I'm hanging out with cool people like yourself, and get connected to people from all over the world, and it's awesome. I'm learning while I'm doing it, and then I'm putting a little bit of work on and shooting that out in the world so that we all have fun with it. So
Yeah, I
it's
think
different work than before.
it is different work, but I don't know that all of us were ready for how much time it would consume. I will tell you, I used to call myself the queen of overwhelm a few years back because I would all of a sudden find myself overwhelmed with so much to do and wonder how I got there. And it's because I said
Huh.
yes to everything. And
Oh yeah.
literally, and here's something I tell business owners: start putting 10 minutes on your calendar for yourself. Now I have more than 10 minutes, right? Now I'm strict about my Friday travel days because I moved to Europe and I'd like to travel on my weekends, right? And so my days are a little longer than they were in the States now, here, particularly because I have clients around the world. So I have to work at certain hours of the night.
Yeah.
But like you said, it doesn't feel like work, but I have set boundaries. I know when I have me time and I've put it on my calendar, and I've made it non-negotiable. And I teach business owners about doing that because they're like, how do I do that? Right? How do I actually put on time if a client wants it? I'm like, the client doesn't exist if you've put it on there for yourself week after week. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Exactly. These small super hacks. They
yeah,
make your life completely different.
huge, huge.
And The fun thing is always, at least in my experience, you only come to these solutions if you take time for yourself to do something that's not work. Do something where you, like for me it's running, cycling, whatever, doing sports, where you then get the realizations like, maybe I should do a little less. Maybe I
Yeah.
should stop working at 8 in the evening and not starting at 5 in the morning. This kind of things.
Yeah.
Though that is sometimes required. But for me, it's often the realization comes when I slow down, and then I get the ideas like, I need to change something, and then I just put it German style into my Excel table or into my calendar.
Oh, I wish I had those tools. But those are the things that I think we always have to remember. But mindset does prevent so many business owners from slowing down because they think about, and I particularly in certain industries, things have slowed lately. And so I've
Hmm.
heard from so many business owners that are going into panic mode because their client funnels or their systems aren't working the way they were. And so they start to panic. And it doesn't matter whether they're in, the UK, Germany, Australia, the US, it's across the board I'm seeing this. And so I think it's an
Yeah,
opportunity to remember, and this is something I've been talking a lot about the last few days, is what's in my control. The external world is going to do what it is going to do. We all saw that in COVID. We've seen it since COVID. We've heard about these words, recession. It creates panic right away. And I think we want to
yeah,
start to over control, but really looking at what is in my control in this moment. What can I actually do that is completely mine? Helps your mindset instead of following fear, going, I'm gonna lose my house, I'm gonna lose this, I'm gonna, everything I've built is gonna fall apart. And I think that's really something I had to learn. You asked about my own personal, I really had to learn to not buy into fear. I mean, I have, parents from the Eastern European bloc who, like, you could lose everything any day now. I mean, that's how I was
yeah,
raised. Any day, any
yeah.
moment. And so I had to learn to let go of that and to what can I control here? And it really does help. It's the little pieces that we can control that really matter. It helps so much of our mindset.
Yeah, it's for me. I always go the worst case in this is always if you follow your lizard brain.
Mm.
So I really need to control myself and go back to, okay, there are security measures which are in place. That's maybe real typical German, I don't know. Where I know that there is an account which is built for this. At least that's how I did it for myself. There's an account. If there are a couple of months which are not working as they should be working, there is something which should not be touched, but there is a safety blanket always, which then gives you at least a little bit more security, and then it releases the stress, at least for me.
It's funny. I think that's true for many people. And until they have to actually lean on their security blanket, I know a lot of, mom entrepreneurs who are like, I made sure I had money set aside so I could stay with my, child when they're young. And it's interesting because the second they start dipping into it, fear just it starts to grip them
Yeah,
again. It's
been there.
amazing. Yeah, right? It's amazing how much our lizard brains, as you call it, can take over and how quickly. And literally, if you take one thing away from this, is really just taking a moment to remember to question the stories you tell yourself. Is this
Hmm.
true? Is the greatest question. Because your brain at first is going to be like, well, of course it's true, right? But is this really true? Is this true 100% of the time? Write out your story on the page. You're going to find out one fact. Today is, for us, today is Monday as we're recording this. That's the only fact that's may exist in your story. And it's really, once you see that, you can start to be like, oh, that's fun. So, not following the lizard brain.
I would like to get us to the end. A couple of questions I ask every guest. So, if you could work with a project that is impacting every human being on Earth, what project would you choose to work with, and why would you work with that project?
Wow, that's big. I think I would work on a project that really helps really those who, because I've raised children who are now in their 20s and understand how much our own self-worth impacts everything from who we choose to spend our life with, how we show up in the world, what we ask for, what we even design. I think I would work on a project that really allows people to understand their worth so early on so that we don't measure it by external factors, so that we're not always chasing some carrot that we never can catch, so that we really understand that we're born as, pure as that baby. That baby we see never needs to prove its worth. Somehow we've learned that we have to prove our worth. And for me, that would be brilliant. I mean, I'd be out of a job, which would be fine, but I would work on that project.
I love it.
Mm.
What advice would you give to a young innovator that's just getting started?
Oh, wow. It's like the first thing I thought was don't lose that passion, which can happen the second you have to wear more than the innovator hat, right? Because as we talked about earlier, that we have so many hats we have to wear as business owners, and innovators love innovating. And so carve out time. Every single client I've worked with who is successful, it's one of the first things we put back into their calendar is creative, innovative time. So don't lose that passion and make time for it.
Great one.
Mm.
Linda, how can people reach out to you, and where can people find you?
Well, you can definitely reach out to me, as you shared, on LinkedIn. I am pretty active on LinkedIn. I'm on there every week. You can find me on my website, which is lindamperry.com. As you said, if you look up Linda Perry, you might find someone else, which is a rock star from the 1990s. So that's not me. And I'm always on Instagram, but it's more for fun, and I do share some wisdom there, but it's at linda.m.perry. And I also have a round table that is free for people. It is called Higher Ground, and you can find links to it on my website. I'm actually updating that piece right now. I host it about 6 to 10 times a year, and I bring expert panelists to talk about issues that entrepreneurs, business owners face that include mindset and really some things that we all get stuck on, that we wake up at 3 a.m. thinking about as business owners. So I hope you'll reach out to me, and I'm always available to chat.
Super. And I will put the links as well into the show notes so people can click through straight away. Linda, awesome. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure having you.
It was a real pleasure being here. Thank you so much.